I want a divorce, Nathan declared, raising his champagne flute at our Thanksgiving table like he was making a celebratory announcement. Rebecca makes me feel alive again, he continued, as 20 pairs of eyes darted between us. She's 24, by the way. Our turkey grew cold as silence enveloped our dining room, a room in a house that, unbeknownst to my husband, had been mine all along. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crystal glasses on our mahogany dining table caught the afternoon sunlight, casting prism-like shadows across the perfectly arranged place settings. I had spent all morning polishing grandmother's silver, arranging the centerpiece of burgundy and gold fall foliage, and preparing a feast meant to bring our family together. Now that same table had become the stage for my public humiliation. I want a divorce, Nathan declared again when the initial shocked silence stretched too long for his comfort. He remained standing at the head of our Thanksgiving table, the position I had never questioned in our 18 years of marriage. His champagne flute was still raised, amber liquid catching the light. Rebecca makes me feel alive again. She's 24, by the way. Our daughter Megan, home from her first semester at Columbia, dropped her fork with a clatter that seemed to echo through the dining room. My son Jason, 16 and already struggling with the typical turbulence of adolescence, stared at his plate with such intensity I feared it might shatter. My sister Caroline's mouth formed a perfect O of shock, while her husband Paul suddenly became extraordinarily interested in rearranging his napkin. My mother, widowed just last year, reached for my hand under the table, her grip surprisingly strong for her 73 years. Good timing, actually, I heard myself say, my voice emerging steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. I dabbed the corner of my mouth with my napkin and looked directly at my husband, this stranger wearing Nathan's face, using Nathan's voice to destroy what I had spent nearly 2 decades building. I am Olivia Bennett, 48 years old, senior partner at Hargrove Bennett & Associates in Philadelphia. For 18 years, I'd balanced complex legal cases by day and family needs by night, constructing what I believed was a secure life with Nathan, our 2 children, and our restored Victorian home in the historic Chestnut Hill neighborhood. What I wanted was simple: to grow old with the man I loved, to watch our children build their own lives, to eventually scale back my practice and perhaps travel to those destinations we'd pinned on the map in our home office. Standing in my way now was Nathan's midlife crisis, manifested in his infatuation with Rebecca, the young paralegal he'd hired 4 months ago at his much smaller law practice. The injustice wasn't just the betrayal, but the deliberate choice to announce his departure at our family Thanksgiving dinner, in front of our children, in front of my family, as if daring me to make a scene. We can discuss the details later, Nathan said magnanimously, still holding his champagne flute aloft. To new beginnings. No one joined his toast. Megan stood abruptly, tears streaming down her face. How could you? She whispered before fleeing the dining room. The sound of her footsteps on the stairs was followed by the slam of her bedroom door. Jason glared at his father with a mixture of disgust and disbelief I had never seen on my son's face. You're pathetic, he said, his voice breaking on the last syllable. Then he too was gone, the back door slamming as he escaped to the yard. I think you should leave, I said quietly. It's still my house too, Olivia, Nathan replied, the smugness in his tone suggesting he'd already calculated his advantage in any upcoming property division. I said nothing as our guests awkwardly excused themselves. My mother whispered that she would check on Megan. Caroline squeezed my shoulder as she passed, murmuring that she would call me tomorrow. Only when everyone had left the dining room did Nathan finally lower his champagne flute, draining its contents before heading toward his study with the remainder of the bottle. I began mechanically clearing dishes, my mind oddly calm despite the wreckage of my marriage strewn across the dining room. 18 years collapsed in a 2-minute announcement. A lifetime of shared dreams rendered meaningless by Rebecca makes me feel alive again. It was while loading the dishwasher that I noticed the blinking light on our landline answering machine. We rarely used it anymore, but some older clients still called that number instead of my cell. I pressed play. "Olivia, it's Martin Goldstein calling," came the familiar voice of my father's longtime friend and attorney. "I've completed the review of your grandmother's estate documents as you requested. Please call me as soon as possible. There are some significant findings I think you'll want to hear immediately." My grandmother Elizabeth, my father's mother, had passed away 6 weeks earlier at 92. A formidable woman who had built a successful real estate business in an era when women were expected to focus exclusively on home and family, she had been my role model and champion. When I chose law over real estate, she supported my decision unreservedly. "Property is just one way to claim your space in the world," she had told me. "The law is another. Both require you to know your worth and stand your ground." I had expected to inherit some keepsakes, perhaps a small investment account. I had no idea that Grandmother Elizabeth had been standing her ground on my behalf until the moment I needed it most. Nathan and I met during our second year of law school at Penn. He was charming, ambitious, with a confidence that seemed to clear obstacles from his path through sheer force of will. I was focused, methodical, already planning my career trajectory with careful precision. We balanced each other, his boldness pushing me beyond my comfort zone, my thoroughness tempering his occasional impulsivity. Or so I had believed. We married after passing the bar, both joining established firms to gain experience. When I became pregnant with Megan 2 years later, Nathan suggested I consider scaling back to part-time work, when I instead made Junior partner. While 7 months pregnant, he celebrated with me publicly, but expressed concerns privately about the demands on my time. "The firm has excellent family leave policies," I assured him, "and they're committed to supporting working parents." When Jason arrived 3 years later, the conversation repeated with greater intensity. "Children need stability, Olivia," Nathan argued. "They need to know someone is focused primarily on them." "They have that," I countered. "They have both of us. But increasingly, they had me." As Nathan's own career failed to advance at the pace he expected, he devoted more hours to work, leaving family logistics largely in my hands. I arranged childcare, managed schedules, coordinated activities, oversaw homework, and still prepared for court appearances and client meetings. I learned to function on 5 hours of sleep and to prepare case briefs during soccer practices. When a historic Victorian in Chestnut Hill came on the market, needing significant restoration but with good bones, as the listing described, I fell in love with its potential. Nathan was hesitant about the required investment of both money and time, but eventually agreed when I offered to manage the renovation process. "This is a statement purchase," he said when we signed the mortgage papers. "It announces that we've arrived." I saw it differently. It's a home where our family can put down roots and create memories. For 3 years, I balanced my legal career, parenting responsibilities, and the careful restoration of a house built in 1892. I researched period-appropriate materials, found skilled craftspeople who respected the home's history, and spent weekends carefully stripping layers of paint from intricate woodwork, while Nathan increasingly begged off these projects, citing work commitments. It was during this period that my grandmother began inviting me to lunch monthly, showing unexpected interest in the restoration details. "You're preserving history while creating your future," she approved. "That takes vision." As the children grew and the house transformed, Nathan and I settled into patterns that I mistook for stability. He established his own smaller practice, specializing in corporate law with a focus on startups and entrepreneurial ventures. I continued at my firm, eventually making senior partner and developing expertise in complex property and estate law. We moved in increasingly separate professional circles, but I believed our home remained our shared center, the foundation we had built together, the space where we remained connected despite diverging daily lives. Looking back, I can identify the warning signs I chose to ignore. Nathan's growing criticism of my practical professional wardrobe, his sudden interest in high-intensity fitness classes at 45, the sports car purchased without discussion, the late nights at the office that he attributed to client meetings, but that carried the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume when he finally came home. Classic midlife crisis behaviors that I recognized but dismissed, telling myself our foundation was too solid to crumble from such cliches. Men go through phases, my sister Caroline assured me when I confided my concerns. Paul bought a motorcycle at 46, remember? Now it's gathering dust in the garage. So I waited for the phase to pass, believing that 18 years of marriage had earned me patience and understanding. Even when Nathan mentioned hiring Rebecca, describing her as exceptionally talented, despite her limited experience, I suppressed my unease. She was fresh out of paralegal training, just a year older than our daughter. Surely Nathan wouldn't be so predictable. 3 weeks ago, I'd stopped by his office unexpectedly, bringing lunch as a surprise. The receptionist's pitying glance should have prepared me for finding his door locked, hushed laughter emanating from within. I left the sandwiches with the receptionist and drove back to my office, telling myself there must be a reasonable explanation. I chose trust over suspicion, loyalty over evidence. Now, watching Nathan through the kitchen doorway as he poured another glass of champagne in solitary celebration of destroying our family, I wondered if I had been loyal to a man who had never truly existed outside my own careful construction of our life together. I returned Martin Goldstein's call early the next morning, before the rest of the household stirred. We arranged to meet at his office that afternoon. "It's significant, Olivia," he said, his tone conveying professional restraint over evident satisfaction. "I think you'll want to hear this in person." When Nathan finally emerged from his study around noon, his expression suggested he expected to find me devastated, perhaps willing to negotiate favorable terms to hasten his departure. Instead, he found me calmly reviewing case files at the kitchen table, dressed in one of my typical court appearance outfits, a tailored charcoal suit that projected authority and competence. "We need to talk," he began, pouring himself coffee. "Yes, we do," I agreed, closing my laptop. "But not today. I have an appointment downtown. Tomorrow would be better, after I've had time to consider our situation more thoroughly." Nathan frowned, thrown by my composure. "This doesn't need to be contentious, Olivia. I'm hoping we can reach an equitable arrangement without unnecessary drama." "Unnecessary drama," I repeated, "like announcing our divorce at Thanksgiving dinner in front of our children and my family?" He had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. That was perhaps impulsive, but I needed to make a clean break, for Rebecca's sake. "Yes, how thoughtful of you to consider her feelings in the matter." I gathered my materials and stood. "As I said, we'll talk tomorrow. I suggest you make arrangements to stay elsewhere tonight. The children need space to process this situation without your presence." "This is still my home," he countered, his tone hardening. "I've contributed to this mortgage for 15 years. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. "We'll discuss financial matters tomorrow," I replied, retrieving my coat from the hall closet. "For tonight, I think it's best for everyone if you give us some space." "You can't dictate." "Dad." Jason stood in the doorway, his expression making it clear he'd heard our exchange. "Just go." The rawness in my son's voice seemed to penetrate Nathan's self-absorption. He nodded slowly. "I'll pack some things and stay at the club tonight." "We'll talk tomorrow, Olivia." Martin Goldstein's office occupied the top floor of a converted brownstone in Center City, its windows overlooking Rittenhouse Square. At 72, Martin maintained a small, selective practice focused primarily on estate law and wealth management for families he'd served for generations. My father had been his friend since college. Martin had drafted my parents' wills, managed my father's estate after his death 5 years ago, and now handled my mother's affairs. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman," Martin began after his assistant had brought us tea. "Prescient in business and, as it turns out, in personal matters as well." He opened a file on his desk, extracting several documents. "When you and Nathan purchased your home in Chestnut Hill 15 years ago, Elizabeth came to see me. She expressed concerns about the property arrangements." "Concerns?" I frowned. "The mortgage is in both our names. Standard joint ownership." "The mortgage, yes," Martin nodded, "but not the actual property." He slid a document across his desk. I recognized it immediately, the deed to our home. But as I read the names listed as property owners, my breath caught. "This can't be right," I said, looking up at Martin. "This shows the property as owned by Elizabeth Bennett Trust, with me as trustee." "It is entirely correct," Martin confirmed, a slight smile lifting the corners of his mouth. 3 months after you and Nathan signed the mortgage, Elizabeth purchased the property outright from the bank. She then established a trust with you as both beneficiary and trustee. The mortgage payments you and Nathan have been making have actually been going to the trust, not to a bank." I stared at the document, struggling to process this information. But why? Why wouldn't she tell me? "Elizabeth was concerned about the imbalance she observed in your marriage," Martin explained gently. "She noticed how you managed the renovation largely alone, how you balanced career and family with minimal support from Nathan. She wanted to ensure that the home you were pouring your heart into remained yours, regardless of future circumstances." "She anticipated this?" I gestured vaguely, encompassing the collapse of my marriage in a single motion. Elizabeth understood. "Men like Nathan," Martin replied. "Men who view achievement as competition rather than collaboration. She saw patterns that concerned her." He extracted another document from the file. "There's more. The trust contains not just the house, but several other assets Elizabeth transferred during her lifetime. Commercial properties in Philadelphia and surrounding areas, an investment portfolio, and shares in her property management company." The figure at the bottom of the summary page made me grip the armrests of my chair. 8 million. "Elizabeth believed strongly in women's financial independence," Martin continued. "The trust is structured as separate property, established after your marriage and explicitly designated as belonging exclusively to you rather than the marital estate." He handed me a sealed envelope. "She asked me to give you this when the time came." She didn't specify what that meant, but he gestured eloquently. "I believe this qualifies." The envelope contained a single sheet of my grandmother's distinctive stationery, her elegant handwriting immediately recognizable. Olivia. "If you're reading this, Martin has determined you need to know about the arrangements I've made. You have always been stronger than you realize. Some lessons I learned too late in my own life. First, a woman must control her own foundation, literally and figuratively. Second, a partnership is measured not by words, but by actions sustained over time. And third, sometimes the greatest freedom comes from the end of illusions. Whatever circumstances have led to this revelation, remember that you have built your life on your own capability. The house and other assets are merely tools. How you use them is your choice entirely. With love and confidence, Grandmother Elizabeth." I carefully refolded the letter, emotions washing through me in waves too complex to name. Shock at the revelation, gratitude for my grandmother's foresight, and a strange, clarifying anger. not just at Nathan's betrayal, but at the disparity between the partnership I believed we had and the reality Elizabeth had observed with clearer eyes. "There's one more thing you should know," Martin said, interrupting my thoughts. "The mortgage. What about it?" "It was paid in full to the trust 5 years ago. The payments Nathan believes have been going toward the mortgage have actually been accumulating in a separate investment account, also in your name. That account currently holds approximately $320,000. I stared at Martin, trying to absorb this final piece of information. So the house has been fully mine for 5 years. Nathan has unknowingly been paying money into my personal investment account, and my grandmother left me nearly $4 million in assets that are legally separate from marital property. Martin nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Elizabeth wanted you to have options. As I left Martin's office, stepping into the crisp November afternoon, Philadelphia spread before me in its historic elegance, the same city where I had built my career, raised my children, and constructed a marriage I now realized had been standing on a foundation of unequal investment from the beginning. Nathan had announced our divorce as if granting me a verdict after a trial I didn't know was occurring. He expected me to crumble, to negotiate from weakness, to accommodate his new life from a position of disadvantage. He had no idea that my grandmother had provided not just financial security, but something far more valuable: the clarity to see our marriage for what it truly was, and the freedom to decide what came next entirely on my own terms. Tomorrow's conversation would not follow the script Nathan had written in his head. Tomorrow, I would remind him, and perhaps myself, of something my grandmother had clearly never forgotten. The most secure foundations are the ones we build ourselves. The following morning dawned with a crystalline clarity typical of late November in Philadelphia. Frost etched delicate patterns on the Victorian windows of my home, the reality of that ownership still settling into my consciousness, like the cold settling over the city. I had slept little, my mind processing the seismic shifts of the past 24 hours. Nathan's public betrayal, my grandmother's extraordinary foresight, the children's raw pain, and beneath it all, a growing awareness of how I had compromised myself year after year while believing I was building something lasting. I made coffee and carried it to the third-floor turret room, a small octagonal space that had been my personal retreat during the renovation years. Nathan rarely ventured up here, claiming the narrow stairs aggravated his knee. In truth, I suspected he simply had no interest in the space I had claimed as my own. With its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, window seat overlooking the garden, and the antique writing desk that had been my first significant purchase after making partner. From the window, I watched the neighborhood coming to life. A jogger in thermal gear padded past on the sidewalk. The Petersons' teenage son scraped frost from his car windshield. Mrs. Rodriguez from across the street carefully navigated her front steps with a trash bag, arthritis making each movement deliberate, normal lives continuing as mine underwent transformation. My phone vibrated with a text from Nathan. Meeting with Rebecca's broker at 11. Need to discuss finances before then. Home at 9:30. No question about whether I would be available. No acknowledgement of the pain he had caused. Our children. Just the expectation that I would accommodate his schedule as I had for 18 years. I didn't reply. Instead, I called Martin Goldstein and arranged for him to email comprehensive documentation of my grandmother's trust, including property ownership records and account statements. By 9:15, I had reviewed everything, understanding clearly the legal and financial position from which I would now operate. At precisely 9:30, I heard Nathan's key in the front door. He still moved through the house with the confident ownership of someone who believed the space belonged partly to him, hanging his coat in the hall closet, setting his keys in the ceramic dish I had made with Megan at a pottery class years. Ego, heading directly to the kitchen where he expected to find me waiting. I remained in my turret room, listening to his movements below. After a few minutes, his footsteps sounded on the stairs. "Olivia?" he called, his voice carrying up the stairwell. "In my study," I replied, the words feeling different now that I understood this was truly my house, not ours. Nathan appeared, in the doorway, slightly out of breath from the climb. At 49, he remained conventionally handsome, salt and pepper hair expensively cut, subtle lines around his eyes that conveyed experience rather than age, physique maintained through the personal training sessions that had become non-negotiable in his schedule despite their cost. Looking at him now, I saw not just my husband of 18 years, but a carefully constructed persona, the successful attorney, the distinguished family man, the established professional ready to claim his due after years of building his practice. "We need to talk," he began, then frowned. "Why are you up here? This isn't practical for a serious conversation." "I find it perfectly suitable," I replied. "Please sit." I gestured to the reading chair opposite my desk. Nathan remained standing. "Olivia, I know yesterday was difficult, but we need to approach this practically. I've already spoken with my attorney about division of assets. If we can reach agreement without extended litigation, it will be better for everyone." "Your attorney," I repeated. That was quick. He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "I've been consulting with him for a few weeks, getting preliminary advice, just being prepared." "I see." I kept my voice neutral. "So while bringing me lunch and discussing our weekend plans, you were already planning your exit strategy." "Don't make this personal," Nathan said, his tone shifting to what I recognized as his client management voice. Reasonable, slightly patronizing. "This is about practical arrangements now. I think it makes sense for you to stay in the house. Temporarily, but given its value, we'll need to sell it for equitable distribution. I'm prepared to be generous about timing." "The house isn't for sale," I interrupted. Nathan blinked, momentarily thrown off script. "That's not really your decision alone, Olivia. This is marital property. Pennsylvania law is clear on equitable distribution." "Actually," I said, turning my laptop screen toward him, "the house isn't marital property. It belongs solely to me." Nathan moved closer, scanning the document displayed on screen, the deed to our home, clearly showing ownership, by the Elizabeth Bennett Trust with me as sole trustee. "What is this?" he demanded. "Some kind of joke? We have a mortgage with Keystone Bank. We've been paying it for 15 years. "We had a mortgage," I corrected. "It was paid in full 5 years ago. The payments you believed were going to the bank have actually been accumulating in a separate investment account. Also, in my name." Nathan's face underwent a remarkable transformation, confusion giving way to disbelief, then anger, his carefully maintained composure cracking. "This is fraud," he said flatly. "You've been hiding assets. No judge will—" "It's not fraud," I interrupted again. "My grandmother purchased the property from the bank 3 months after our original mortgage was signed. She established a trust with me as beneficiary. All perfectly legal and documented. The trust was created after our marriage, as separate property, and I wasn't aware of these arrangements until yesterday." "I don't believe you," Nathan said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Why would Elizabeth do this without telling you?" "She had concerns about the balance in our marriage," I said, watching his expression carefully. "She wanted to ensure I had security regardless of future circumstances." "That's absurd. She couldn't have predicted?" "Apparently she observed patterns that concerned her," I continued, echoing Martin's words. "She was a very perceptive woman." Nathan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from countless difficult negotiations over the years. He was recalculating, reassessing, his position based on unexpected information. "Even if this is legitimate," he said finally, "the mortgage payments came from our joint accounts. I'm entitled to my contribution." "Yes," I agreed. The $320,000 that's accumulated in the investment account represents the mortgage payments made after the loan was satisfied. We can discuss fair distribution of that amount, but the house itself remains mine. Nathan paced the small room, his agitation palpable. This changes nothing about our divorce. Rebecca and I'm not contesting the divorce, Nathan, I said quietly. If you want to leave our marriage for a 24-year-old paralegal, that's your choice. I'm simply clarifying our financial position so we can proceed with accurate information. He stopped pacing, studying me with narrowed eyes. You seem remarkably composed for someone whose husband just asked for divorce. I'm processing, I said truthfully. But practical matters require attention regardless of emotional circumstances. There's more, isn't there? He asked, his attorney's instinct for withheld information surfacing. What else did Elizabeth leave you? I considered how much to reveal. Nathan would eventually learn the full extent of my grandmother's bequest through financial disclosures during divorce proceedings. But at this moment, information was leverage, and after years of partnership where he had increasingly prioritized his needs over our family's well-being, I felt no obligation to volunteer everything immediately. There are additional assets, I acknowledged. We can discuss those when our respective attorneys meet. I'll be retaining Patricia Winters from Hargrove and Associates. Nathan's eyebrows rose. Patricia handles high-net-worth divorces. Yes, I agreed. She does. Understanding dawned in his eyes. How much, Olivia? How much did Elizabeth leave you? Enough, I said simply. Enough that I can make decisions based on what's best for me and our children, rather than financial necessity. Nathan sank into the reading chair, the implications of this shift in power dynamics visibly settling over him. For 18 years, he had operated from the assumption that his income, while not our family's largest, represented greater freedom and choice. He had leveraged that perceived advantage in countless small ways, from major purchases made unilaterally to career, decisions that prioritized his ambitions over family stability. This doesn't have to be adversarial, he said finally, his tone conciliatory. We can still reach reasonable arrangements about all aspects of the divorce. I agree, I replied. But those arrangements will be based on accurate understanding of our respective positions, not on assumptions about vulnerability or dependency that no longer apply, if they ever did. Nathan checked his watch, a Rolex he had purchased after winning his first significant corporate case, replacing the Tissot I had given him for our 10th anniversary. I need to meet Rebecca's broker, he said, standing. We can continue this discussion later. Rebecca's broker, I repeated. You're already looking at property together? She needs to relocate closer to the office, he explained, defensive now. Her current apartment is too far for convenient access. Of course, I said. Convenience is important. As Nathan headed for the door, a question formed that I hadn't allowed myself to ask yesterday, amid the shock of his announcement. How long? I asked, my voice steady. He paused without turning. How long what? How long have you been planning? To leave? How long with Rebecca? Nathan sighed, shoulders tensing slightly. Does it matter? To me, yes. He turned partially, not quite meeting my eyes. Rebecca started at the firm 4 months ago. Things developed gradually. That doesn't answer my question. 3 months, he admitted. But I've been dissatisfied for longer. Yet, you never once suggested counseling, never once said our marriage was in trouble. You just made a unilateral decision, then announced it as a done deal at our family Thanksgiving. Would counseling have changed anything? He countered. Would it have made you less focused on your career, less consumed with being the perfect mother, the perfect homemaker, the perfect attorney? Would it have made you see me as something other than another responsibility to manage? The accusation landed with unexpected force. Was that how he had experienced our marriage? As subordinate to my other priorities? The question opened a door to self-reflection I wasn't prepared to walk through yet, not while still processing the deliberate cruelty of his public announcement. "We'll never know," I said finally, "because you didn't value our marriage enough to try." Nathan left without further comment. I listened to his footsteps descending the stairs, the familiar sound of the front door closing behind him. Then, silence. The particular quality of silence that follows the departure of something once central that will never return. I remained at my desk, staring at the documents that represented my grandmother's extraordinary gift. Not just financial security, but the freedom to face this unexpected chapter without the pressure of immediate practical concerns. I could focus on the emotional well-being of our children, on my own healing process, on thoughtful decisions about next steps, rather than reactive scrambling to maintain basic stability. The sound of a door opening downstairs broke my reverie. Megan or Jason must be awake. I closed my laptop and headed down to check on them, wondering how to share my discovery about the house and what it might mean for our future. I found Megan in the kitchen, sitting at the island with a mug of tea, still in her pajamas despite the late morning hour. Her eyes were puffy from crying, dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. At 19, she looked suddenly younger, more vulnerable, as if her father's announcement had stripped away some of the confident independence she had been cultivating at college. "Hey," I said softly, moving to the coffee maker. "Did you sleep at all?" She shrugged. "A little. Is he gone?" "Yes. He just left." "Good." She stared into her mug. "I heard you talking. Are we losing the house?" The question caught me off guard. Of all the potential consequences of Nathan's departure, I hadn't considered that the children might fear losing their home. But of course they would. Divorce typically meant selling shared assets, disrupting not just emotional but physical foundations. "No," I said firmly, sitting beside her. "We're not losing the house." Megan looked up, relief visible in her reddened eyes. "Really? But won't Dad want his half?" "It's complicated," I began, then reconsidered. My children deserved honesty, not sanitized versions of reality. Actually, it's surprisingly simple. The house belongs to me, completely. Your great-grandmother made arrangements years ago that I only discovered yesterday. I explained Elizabeth's trust in broad terms, not detailing the full financial implications, but ensuring Megan understood our home was secure. As I spoke, I watched her shoulders gradually relax, one immediate fear alleviated. "So Dad can't make us sell it?" she confirmed when I finished. "No. This house is ours for as long as we want it." Megan nodded slowly, absorbing this information. Great-Grandma Elizabeth was pretty badass, wasn't she? The characterization startled a laugh. From me? Yes, she absolutely was. "Why didn't she tell you? About the house and everything?" I considered the question, trying to understand Elizabeth's thinking myself. "I believe she wanted me to feel I was building something with your father, not being rescued or protected. She created a safety net but didn't want me living my life conscious of it." "Like training wheels you don't know are there," Megan suggested. "Something like that," I agreed. Though I think she hoped I'd never need to discover them at all. Megan's expression darkened. "I still can't believe Dad. Announcing it like that, in front of everyone. And for what? Some paralegal barely older than me?" I chose my words carefully. "Your father is making choices I don't understand and can't defend. But how we respond to those choices is something we can control." "I don't want to see him," Megan said flatly. "Not for a while." "That's your decision," I acknowledged. "But remember that relationships can evolve and heal over time. What feels impossible now might look different months or years from now." "Are you defending him?" "No." I'm defending your right to a relationship with your father in whatever form works for you, whenever you're ready. That might be soon, or it might be much later. There's no required timeline for processing this kind of hurt. Megan considered this, then asked the question I had been dreading. Are you okay, Mom? Really? The simple inquiry threatened to breach the careful composure I had maintained. Was I okay? My marriage of 18 years had imploded without warning. My husband had humiliated me publicly while pursuing a relationship with someone nearly half my age. The foundation I thought we had built together had turned out to be largely my own construction, supported not by Nathan's commitment, but by my grandmother's silent intervention. I will be, I said, finding truth in those words even as I spoke them. This isn't what I would have chosen, but I'm discovering I'm stronger than I realized. Jason appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in yesterday's clothes, his expression suggesting he'd gotten even less sleep than his sister. Dad's gone? He asked immediately. Yes, I confirmed. He had an appointment. Jason made a dismissive sound. Of course he did. Mom was just telling me that we get to keep the house, Megan told him. Great-Grandma Elizabeth made sure of it years ago. Jason looked to me for confirmation. When I nodded, his response surprised me. Good, he said firmly. It was always more yours than his anyway. You're the one who restored every inch of it. The observation, so matter-of-fact from my 16-year-old son, struck me profoundly. The children had seen what I had not fully acknowledged, the imbalance in investment, care, and commitment that had characterized not just the house, but perhaps our entire marriage. I need to tell you both something, I said, making a sudden decision. Your father and I will work out the details of separation and divorce over the coming weeks and months. It will take time, and there will be difficult moments for all of us. But I want you to know that financially, we are secure. I explained in general terms about Elizabeth's trust, emphasizing not the specific amounts, but the stability it provided. This means you don't need to worry about college tuition, Megan, or your future plans, Jason. It means we can make decisions based on what's best for our well-being, not financial necessity. They absorbed this information with visible relief, another layer of anxiety easing from their young shoulders. What happens now? Jason asked after a moment. Now, I said, reaching for both their hands across the kitchen island. We take care of ourselves and each other. We feel whatever we need to feel. We give ourselves permission to be angry, sad, confused, all of it. And we remember that while we didn't choose this situation, we can choose how we move through it. Later that afternoon, I sat in Patricia Winter's office, laying out the details of my situation with the precise organization that had made me an effective attorney. Patricia listened without interruption, making occasional notes, her expression professionally neutral despite the dramatic revelations. Well, she said when I finished, your grandmother was quite remarkable. Yes, I agreed. I'm only beginning to appreciate how much. The trust structure is solid, Patricia continued, reviewing the documents Martin had provided. Established after marriage, clearly designated as separate property. Nathan may challenge it, but he's unlikely to succeed, especially given the immaculate documentation. Will he try? I asked. Patricia considered the question. Depends on his attorney's approach and how much his ego is involved. Men like Nathan often struggle with unexpected shifts in power dynamics. He assumed he held financial advantage. Discovering the opposite may trigger reactive litigation regardless of merit. And if he does challenge it? We defend vigorously, she replied simply. But let's not borrow trouble. Our immediate priority is securing temporary arrangements that protect your interests while formal proceedings develop. We spent the next hour outlining strategy, considering various scenarios, and identifying immediate actions required. Patricia was thorough, pragmatic, and occasionally surprisingly compassionate. qualities that had made her one of Philadelphia's most respected divorce attorneys. "One more thing," she said as our meeting concluded. "Don't be surprised if Nathan attempts to renegotiate once the full financial picture becomes clear. Men who leave their wives for significantly younger women often discover that maintaining two households at the standard to which they've become accustomed is more challenging than anticipated." I hadn't considered this aspect, that Nathan's romantic choices might have practical implications beyond the emotional devastation. "What do you mean?" Rebecca is 24, early in her career, likely with modest income and expectations of being taken care of by her established partner, Patricia explained. Nathan will want to provide a lifestyle that demonstrates his success and viability as a partner despite the age gap. Meanwhile, he'll be managing support obligations to you and potentially the children, separate housing costs, and the expensive habits of a man trying to appear younger than his years. Her assessment was clinically accurate yet carried uncomfortable implications. "You think he'll try to reduce his financial obligations to us?" "I think," Patricia said carefully, "that you should prepare for Nathan to discover that his new beginning comes with unanticipated costs, both financial and otherwise." As I left Patricia's office, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Rittenhouse Square. Professional couples hurried home from work. Parents collected children from after-school activities, everyday lives continuing their rhythm while mine recalibrated to a new reality. I found myself walking through the square rather than heading directly to my car, drawn to the center garden where bare trees stretched skeletal branches against the deepening blue sky. On a bench near the fountain, I finally allowed myself a moment of complete honesty. I was hurt, deeply, profoundly hurt by Nathan's betrayal, by the casual cruelty of his public announcement, by the revelation that he had been planning his exit for months while maintaining the facade of our marriage. I was angry, at Nathan for his choices, at myself for not seeing the warning signs more clearly, even momentarily at Elizabeth for creating a safety net without telling me, depriving me of full awareness of my own situation. But beneath the hurt and anger, I recognized something unexpected emerging, a sense of clarity about both past and future that felt like strength crystallizing from pain. For 18 years, I had poured myself into building a life that balanced career, family, and marriage. I had made countless small compromises in service to a partnership that, I now realized, had been incrementally eroding even as I worked to maintain it. Nathan's dramatic exit had not destroyed something perfect. It had simply revealed fractures that had been developing for years. The revelation of Elizabeth's trust had not created my independence but illuminated it, showing me that the foundation I thought required two builders had largely been my own creation all along. As the November chill deepened around me, I made a promise to myself. I would move through this unexpected chapter, not as victim, but as architect, designing a new foundation, based not on what I had lost, but on what I had discovered I possessed all along. The week following Thanksgiving unfolded in a blur of practical arrangements and emotional adjustments. Nathan moved his essential belongings to a suite at the Philadelphia Athletic Club, a temporary solution, he explained, while he and Rebecca sorted out their living situation. The children maintained a careful distance, Megan returning to Columbia for final exams, while Jason retreated into a fortress of schoolwork and basketball practice, minimizing his time at home. I found myself in the strange position of simultaneously managing my ongoing caseload at the firm, initiating divorce proceedings, and beginning to understand the full scope of my grandmother's bequest. Martin Goldstein arranged meetings with the property management company Elizabeth had left me, introducing me to the team that had maintained her commercial real estate portfolio for decades. "Your grandmother was hands-on, but never micromanaged," explained Eleanor Santiago, the company's operations director, during our first meeting. "She trusted expertise while maintaining clear vision and standards. The staff respected her tremendously." The portfolio included 6 commercial properties in Philadelphia and the surrounding counties, a mix of retail spaces, professional offices, and one small apartment building in University City. All were well maintained, with stable tenants and steady income. The investment accounts were similarly balanced, a thoughtfully diversified portfolio that generated consistent returns without excessive risk. Elizabeth believed in building wealth steadily, not spectacularly, Martin told me as we reviewed the financial statements. She was more interested in sustainable value than impressive numbers. That philosophy resonated with me, mirroring my own approach to career and family, consistent effort over time rather than dramatic gestures or risky ventures. Nathan had occasionally criticized this mindset as lacking ambition, particularly when comparing my methodical career advancement to his more entrepreneurial approach with his boutique firm. What he had perceived as limitation, I now recognized as strength, the capability to build something substantial through patience, attention to detail, and long-term vision. Elizabeth had seen this quality in me and reinforced it through her extraordinary gift. By Friday evening, exhaustion finally caught up with me. I arrived home after meeting with the property management team to find the house dark and quiet, Jason having texted that he was staying at a friend's house after their basketball game. For the first time since Nathan's announcement, I had the house entirely to myself. No children needing support, no Nathan creating tension, no immediate crisis requiring attention. I poured a glass of wine and wandered through the rooms of my home, seeing them with new awareness of their significance. This wasn't just a house I had renovated while balancing career and family. It was tangible evidence of my capacity to envision and create. Each restored feature represented choices I had made, problems I had solved, beauty I had uncovered beneath layers of neglect. In the library, formerly a cramped sitting room until I had removed a non-structural wall to create a generous space with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, I settled into the window seat I had designed specifically for this corner. Outside, the neighborhood Christmas lights were beginning to appear, early decorators already transforming their historic homes with tasteful displays that complemented the Victorian architecture. My phone chimed with a text from Nathan. Need to meet tomorrow to discuss financial disclosures. My office, 10 a.m. The presumption was so characteristic, assuming my availability on a Saturday, suggesting his office rather than neutral territory, framing it as statement rather than question. 6 days earlier, I would have automatically adjusted my schedule to accommodate, prioritizing his convenience over my own plans. I typed my response carefully. Not available tomorrow. Patricia Winters will contact your attorney to arrange a meeting for preliminary financial discussions next week. His reply came quickly. This could be simpler if we talk directly first. I didn't respond. The pattern was familiar. Nathan preferred direct negotiations where he could leverage personal connection and persuasive skill rather than working through professional intermediaries who would focus solely on legal and financial considerations. Setting my phone aside, I returned to contemplating my home and future. The week's revelations had created space for possibility I hadn't allowed myself to consider before. Not just surviving Nathan's departure, but potentially thriving in its aftermath. The financial security Elizabeth had provided meant I could make decisions based on what would best serve my well-being and the children's needs, not economic necessity. But what did I actually want for this next chapter? The question felt foreign, after so many years of balancing others' needs against professional responsibilities. What would life look like if shaped primarily by my own choices rather than compromise and accommodation? Before I could explore these thoughts further, the doorbell rang, an unexpected interruption at nearly 9 o'clock. Through the beveled glass panels of the front door, I could make out a woman's silhouette. For a moment, I wondered if Rebecca had somehow found the audacity to appear at my home. When I opened the door, however, I found a stranger, young, professionally, dressed despite the late hour, her expression conveying both determination and discomfort. "Mrs. Calloway?" she asked, using my married name. "Yes," I confirmed, studying her more carefully. Mid-20s, shoulder-length brown hair, tailored wool coat over what appeared to be office attire. "Can I help you?" "My name is Alexis Morgan," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. I work at Calloway Legal. I need to speak with you about something important." Nathan's firm. Understanding dawned immediately. "You're a colleague of Rebecca's," I stated rather than asked. She nodded, glancing nervously over her shoulder at the quiet street. "Could I come in? I wouldn't be here if it weren't truly important." Professional caution warred with curiosity. Allowing this unknown woman into my home carried risk, but her evident anxiety suggested legitimate urgency. "Briefly," I agreed, stepping back to admit her. In the entry hall, Alexis removed her coat, revealing a simple but elegant black dress and low heels, office attire, as I had guessed, but for a workday that had clearly extended far beyond normal hours. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, following me to the living room. "I know this is unorthodox." "That's one word for it," I agreed, gesturing for her to sit. "Why are you here, Ms. Morgan?" She perched on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I'm a junior associate at Calloway Legal. I've been there for 2 years, since passing the bar." "And?" I prompted when she hesitated. "And I have information I believe you should know," she continued, meeting my eyes directly now. "About Nathan's financial dealings. About the firm." My attorney's instincts immediately activated. "Ms. Morgan, if you're providing information about my husband's business that could be relevant to divorce proceedings, you should understand the potential ethical implications for your own career." "I do," she said firmly. "Believe me, I've spent weeks weighing the professional and ethical considerations. I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe this information outweighs those concerns." Her seriousness gave me pause. "What exactly are we discussing?" Alexis reached into her purse and withdrew a USB drive, placing it on the coffee table between us. "Financial records from Calloway Legal for the past 18 months, account transfers, loan documents, client billing discrepancies." "You're alleging financial impropriety," I said carefully. "I'm providing evidence of it," she corrected. "Nathan has been systematically manipulating the firm's finances for at least a year, possibly longer, but I can only verify these records. He's diverted client retainers to personal accounts, double-billed for services, and most recently, taken out a substantial business loan using falsified collateral documentation." The implications were seismic, not just for our divorce proceedings, but potentially for Nathan's professional standing and legal liability. "Why are you bringing this to me?" I asked, leaving the USB drive untouched. "If you have evidence of legal or ethical violations, the proper channels would be the State Bar Association or relevant authorities." Alexis's expression tightened, because 3 months ago, I raised concerns about billing irregularities directly with Nathan. He assured me it was an administrative oversight being corrected. 2 weeks later, I was removed from our major corporate accounts and assigned to less significant cases. Last week, after your situation became known at the office, I overheard Nathan telling Rebecca they needed to accelerate the timeline because you might start asking uncomfortable questions about the firm's finances during divorce proceedings. The pieces aligned with disturbing clarity. Nathan's hasty exit from our marriage, the rush to establish new living arrangements with Rebecca, the insistence on discussing financial matters directly rather than through attorneys, all suggested urgency beyond mere romantic impatience. "You believe he's preparing to hide assets," I stated. "I believe he already has," Alexis confirmed, "and I believe Rebecca is fully aware and complicit. Their relationship began shortly after she joined the firm, and she was quickly given access to financial systems well beyond what would be normal for her position." I considered the young woman before me, assessing her possible motivations. This is a significant professional risk for you, Ms. Morgan. Why take it? For the first time, her composed facade showed cracks, a flash of genuine anger quickly controlled. Because I worked incredibly hard to become an attorney. I graduated top of my class, passed the bar on my first attempt, and joined Callaway Legal believing it was a legitimate firm where I could build my career. I refused to have my professional reputation and future compromised by association with financial fraud. Her words rang with authentic indignation, the principled outrage of someone whose core values had been violated. I recognized both the emotion and its legitimacy. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Nothing," she said simply. "Use this information as you see fit. I've made copies of everything and documented my concerns through appropriate channels, including a confidential ethics inquiry to the Bar Association. I'm not seeking involvement in your divorce or any personal matters. I simply believe you deserve to know what you're facing." The clarity of her position was compelling. This wasn't someone seeking advantage or inserting herself into our family drama. This was a professional protecting both her own integrity and ensuring that relevant information reached appropriate parties. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," I said, finally picking up the USB drive. "I'll review this with my attorney. I can't promise what actions I'll take, but I appreciate your courage in coming forward." Alexis nodded, standing to indicate our conversation was concluded. "I should go, if Nathan discovers I've been here." "Of course," I agreed, walking her back to the entry hall. As she put on her coat, a thought occurred to me. "Ms. Morgan, are you continuing to work at the firm?" "For now," she confirmed. "Until I secure another position. I've been interviewing." "In what practice area?" "Corporate law with focus on ethical compliance and governance," she replied. "I'm particularly interested in helping companies establish transparent financial systems and accountability structures." I reached into my purse, extracted a business card, and wrote a name on the back. "Contact Elaine Hargrove at my firm. Tell her I suggested you reach out regarding the associate position in our corporate ethics division. She's been seeking someone with precisely your focus." Surprise and wariness crossed Alexis's face in equal measure. "I appreciate that, but I'm not looking for compensation for this information." "This isn't compensation," I clarified. "It's recognition of professional integrity and relevant expertise. Whether or not you pursue the opportunity is entirely your choice." After Alexis departed, I sat with the USB drive in my hand, contemplating its implications. If the information it contained was accurate, Nathan wasn't just leaving our marriage. For a younger woman, he was potentially fleeing financial impropriety that could have serious professional and legal consequences. The timing of his announcement, the public nature of the disclosure, the rush to establish separate living arrangements, all took on new significance in light of Alexis's revelations. What I had attributed to midlife crisis and impulsive infatuation might actually be calculated strategy, using personal drama to disguise professional misconduct. I placed the USB drive in my home safe, then called Patricia Winters despite the late hour. Her response was measured but decisive. "Don't access those files yourself," she advised. "Bring the drive to my office first thing tomorrow. I'll have our forensic financial team review the contents with appropriate documentation of chain of custody. If there's evidence of financial impropriety that could affect divorce proceedings or require disclosure to regulatory authorities, we'll handle it through proper channels." The next morning, I delivered the USB drive to Patricia as instructed, providing a detailed account of Alexis's visit and claims. Patricia listened without interruption, her expression revealing nothing. "This could significantly alter our approach," she noted when I finished. "If Nathan has been engaging in financial misconduct and is attempting to hide assets, the court will take a very different view of asset division and potentially support arrangements. I'm less concerned about financial advantage than potential liability." I admitted. If Nathan has engaged in fraudulent activities through his firm, could there be implications for our family assets or my professional standing? Potentially, Patricia acknowledged. Which is why we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with before taking any action. My team will review these records thoroughly and advise on appropriate next steps. As I left Patricia's office, my phone chimed with a text from Nathan. Your failure to respond about tomorrow's meeting is unprofessional. This divorce doesn't need to be contentious unless you make it so. The message carried his typical blend of accusation and implied superiority, positioning himself as the reasonable party while casting me as potentially difficult or obstructive. For 18 years, this rhetorical approach had effectively prompted me to accommodate his preferences to prove I wasn't being unreasonable. Now, with fresh perspective on both our marriage and his possible motivations, I saw the manipulation clearly. I typed a single response. All communication regarding financial matters should go through our respective attorneys. Nathan's reply came immediately. We're still partners in raising our children. We need to maintain direct communication. This strategic pivot was familiar, invoking our shared parental responsibility to justify circumventing professional intermediaries who might scrutinize his financial claims too carefully. The tactic might have worked a week earlier, but now it simply confirmed my growing awareness of his manipulative patterns. I didn't respond. That afternoon, Martin Goldstein called with news about Elizabeth's property management company. The current executive team is solid, he reported. They've maintained steady growth under Elizabeth's direction and have a clear strategic plan for the coming year. The question is how involved you want to be in operations moving forward. The question caught me off guard. With divorce proceedings, ongoing professional responsibilities, and the children's emotional needs, I hadn't considered active involvement in managing my grandmother's business interests. What are my options? I asked. You could maintain the current arrangement, with the executive team reporting quarterly to you as trustee, Martin explained. Or you could take a more active role on the board, providing strategic direction, while leaving day-to-day operations to the existing management. Elizabeth transitioned to this approach in her later years. And if I wanted to be more directly involved? That would require significant time commitment, Martin cautioned. Elizabeth was deeply engaged in the early decades, overseeing acquisitions, property improvements, tenant relationships. It was essentially her full-time focus. I considered this information thoughtfully. My legal career had provided professional fulfillment and financial security, but it had also demanded sacrifices, particularly in time with my children and personal pursuits. As Megan prepared to leave for college, and Jason approached his final years of high school, perhaps a transition to greater involvement with Elizabeth's business interests could provide new challenges while allowing more flexibility. I'd like to meet with the executive team, I decided. Not to interfere with current operations, but to understand the business more thoroughly before determining my level of involvement. I'll arrange it, Martin agreed. Perhaps after the new year, when the immediate divorce proceedings are further along. The mention of divorce brought me back to the USB drive and its potential implications. Martin, there's something else I should mention. I've received information suggesting Nathan may have engaged in financial impropriety through his law practice. I outlined Alexis's visit and claims without specific details, explaining that Patricia's team was reviewing the evidence. Martin listened with the careful attention I'd come to appreciate, asking clarifying questions about timing and potential impact on our divorce proceedings. If these allegations prove substantive, he said when I finished, you'll need to consider not just the divorce implications, but potential liability concerns. Has Nathan ever used family assets as collateral for business loans or investments? The question triggered a memory, Nathan asking me to sign paperwork for a refinancing of our home roughly 18 months earlier. I had been in the midst of preparing for a major case, distracted and trusting. I had signed where indicated after only cursory review. Possibly, I admitted. There was paperwork about 18 months ago that Nathan presented as a simple refinancing of our mortgage, which I now know didn't actually exist at that point. I signed it during a particularly busy period. Martin's expression grew concerned. Do you have copies of those documents? No, Nathan handled the financial paperwork for the house. Given what we now know about the property ownership, I assumed those documents were meaningless since he couldn't actually refinance a property he didn't own. That's technically correct, Martin acknowledged. But if Nathan represented himself as owner or co-owner of the property to secure business financing, that could constitute fraud. And if your signature appears on those documents, there could be complications regarding your knowledge or complicity. The implication was sobering. You think he might have forged my signature on loan documents using the house as collateral, even though he didn't actually own it? I think, Martin said carefully, that we need to investigate this possibility thoroughly. If Nathan believed he co-owned the property and used it to secure financing under false pretenses, there could be serious legal implications beyond your divorce proceedings. This perspective added new urgency to understanding exactly what information Alexis's USB drive contained. If Nathan had engaged in financial fraud using what he believed was our joint property as collateral, the consequences could extend far beyond asset division and divorce, potentially involving criminal charges, professional disbarment, and complicated liability questions. I'll contact Patricia immediately, I said, reaching for my phone. One moment, Martin cautioned. Before proceeding, consider the strategic implications. If Nathan is indeed facing potential financial or legal jeopardy, his approach to divorce, negotiations may be significantly influenced by these concerns. Understanding his vulnerabilities before revealing your knowledge could provide important leverage. The suggestion gave me pause. You're advising me to withhold information about possible fraud? Not at all, Martin clarified. I'm suggesting that timing and approach matter. Consult with Patricia about the most effective strategy for addressing these issues in a way that protects your interests while fulfilling any legal obligations regarding disclosure. As I drove home that evening, Martin's advice echoed in my mind, alongside the accumulating revelations about Nathan's possible motives and actions. What had initially appeared to be a painful but straightforward divorce, prompted by midlife crisis and infatuation with a younger woman, was revealing itself as potentially something far more calculated. Had Nathan's public announcement at Thanksgiving been deliberately designed to create personal drama that would distract from financial improprieties? Was Rebecca not just romantic partner, but accomplice in financial misconduct? Could their rushed timeline for establishing new living arrangements be motivated not by passion, but by strategic attempts to shield assets or create distance before potential investigations? These questions required careful consideration and professional guidance. But one thing was becoming increasingly clear. Nathan's departure from our marriage, however painful, might ultimately represent liberation rather than loss, freeing me not just from a relationship grown unbalanced, but from potential entanglement in financial and legal complications I hadn't known existed. As I turned onto our street, I noticed a moving truck parked in front of the Richardsons' house across the way. Eleanor Richardson, recently widowed after 40 years of marriage, was downsizing to a condominium closer to her daughter's family. I had sent flowers after Herbert's funeral, but had been too consumed with work to offer more substantive support. Impulsively, I pulled into my driveway, then walked across the street where Eleanor was directing movers carrying a small antique e-desk. "Eleanor?" I called, approaching the driveway. "Do you need any help?" She turned, surprise and pleasure crossing her face. "Olivia, how lovely to see you. No, the movers have everything under control. Just making sure family heirlooms are handled properly." "Of course," I nodded, understanding completely. "How are you holding up?" "One day at a time," she replied with the straightforward pragmatism I had always appreciated in her. 43 years in this house, 47 married to Herbert. Starting over at 72 wasn't in my life plan, but here we are. The quiet dignity in her voice struck me powerfully. Eleanor was navigating a far more profound loss than mine, yet facing it with grace and forward movement. "Would you like to come over for tea when you're finished here?" I offered. "I could use the company, and it seems we both find ourselves in periods of unexpected transition." Eleanor studied me with the perceptive gaze of someone who had observed neighborhood dynamics for decades. "I heard about Thanksgiving," she said gently. Nathan's announcement wasn't exactly private. "No," I agreed, surprised to find I could almost smile at the understatement. "It certainly wasn't." "Tea would be lovely," Eleanor decided. "Give me an hour to finish here?" That hour gave me time to prepare not just tea, but a proper evening. Spread, finger sandwiches, shortbread cookies from my grandmother's recipe, and the good china rarely used since Nathan preferred casual dining. The simple act of creating welcome for someone facing her own transition felt grounding amid the upheaval of my circumstances. When Eleanor arrived, we settled in the library with tea service arranged before the fireplace I had painstakingly restored 3 years earlier, uncovering original Victorian tilework beneath layers of mid-century modifications. "This room always was the heart of the house," Eleanor observed, glancing around appreciatively. "Herbert and I watched you transform it from that awkward divided space the previous owners created. Your vision was remarkable." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched by her recognition of effort that Nathan had often dismissed as obsessive attention to historical details that nobody else notices. For the next 2 hours, Eleanor and I talked, not just about our respective situations, but about the nature of transition itself, about rebuilding after loss, about discovering strength in unexpected circumstances. At 72, having lost her partner of nearly 5 decades, Eleanor spoke not with resignation, but with clear-eyed assessment of both grief and possibility. "The hardest part isn't the logistics," she confided. "It's recalibrating identity. For so long, I was Herbert's wife, this house's mistress, center of our family operations. Now I'm learning to exist differently, to define purpose and meaning in new terms." Her perspective offered insight into my own situation, the opportunity, within difficulty, to reconsider not just practical arrangements but fundamental questions of identity and purpose. Who was I beyond wife, mother, attorney, homeowner? What did I want from the next phase of life, independent of roles and responsibilities that had defined me for so many years? As Eleanor prepared to leave, she paused in the entry hall, taking in the home she had visited countless times during neighborhood gatherings and community events. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "when Herbert and I moved in across the street, this house was owned by the Lindsays. Lovely couple, raised 3 children here. When they sold to the Matsons, we thought the house lost something essential: warmth. I suppose, a sense of being truly inhabited rather than merely occupied. The Matsons were perfectly nice but viewed the house as investment more than home." She met my eyes directly. "When you and Nathan purchased it 15 years ago, the house came alive again. But Olivia, it was always your energy that animated. These rooms, your vision that restored its character, your presence that made it home. Whatever comes next, remember that you've already proven your capacity to create beauty and meaning from bare foundations. That capability doesn't depend on Nathan or anyone else." After Eleanor left, I remained in the entry hall, contemplating her words. They echoed something my grandmother had written in her letter. "You have built your life on your own capability. The house and other assets are merely tools." Between Elizabeth's extraordinary foresight and Eleanor's wisdom born from experience, I was beginning to recognize a truth that had been obscured by years of compromise and accommodation. The foundation of my life had never truly depended on Nathan's presence or contribution. What I had attributed to partnership had largely been my own creation all along. supported not by his commitment, but by my persistent effort and capability. This recognition didn't erase the pain of betrayal or the complexity of untangling 18 years of shared life, but it offered essential perspective as I faced the challenging days ahead. The confidence that whatever Nathan had taken in leaving, he hadn't diminished my fundamental capacity to build, restore, and create. As evidence mounted of his possible financial misconduct, I understood that his departure might ultimately represent not loss but liberation. Freedom from entanglement with choices and consequences I hadn't known existed beneath the surface of our shared life. The house had always been mine, secured by my grandmother's extraordinary foresight. But more importantly, the strength to move forward had always been mine as well, a foundation far more essential than property or finances, and one that Nathan's departure could never diminish. Monday morning arrived with a crystalline December clarity, frost etching delicate patterns on the windows of my home office. I had been awake since 5, reviewing case files for an upcoming hearing while waiting for Patricia Winters to contact me about the information on Alexis Morgan's USB drive. The weekend had passed in relative quiet. Jason had spent much of it with friends, his usual method of processing difficult emotions. Megan had texted daily from Colombia, her messages shifting gradually from raw anger at her father to practical questions about holiday arrangements. "Should I still come home for Christmas break as planned?" she had asked in her most recent message. "Will Dad be there?" The question highlighted the cascading complications of Nathan's departure, how holidays, celebrations, and family traditions would now require renegotiation and reimagining. I had assured Megan that her home remained exactly that, her home, and that we would navigate the holiday situation together when she returned. At precisely 9:30, my phone rang with Patricia's number. "Olivia," she began without preamble, "we need to meet immediately. Our forensic team has completed preliminary analysis of the files Ms. Morgan provided, and the findings are significant. How soon can you come to my office?" "I have court at 11, I replied, already mentally rearranging my schedule. "But I can be there by 10:15. "Perfect. I've cleared my morning for this discussion." The urgency in Patricia's normally measured tone sent a ripple of apprehension through me. Whatever the USB drive had revealed, it clearly warranted immediate attention. 40 minutes later, I sat across from Patricia in her office where she was joined by James Powell, head of her firm's forensic accounting division. The conference table between us held neatly organized folders, printouts of financial records, and a laptop displaying complex spreadsheets. "Before we begin," Patricia said, "I want to emphasize that what we're discussing remains confidential. We haven't yet determined which authorities may need to be notified about these findings, and premature disclosure could complicate both legal proceedings and potential investigations." "Understood," I agreed, the attorney in me recognizing the careful distinction she was drawing between confidentiality and potential legal obligations regarding disclosure of financial crimes. James adjusted his glasses, a gesture that seemed to help him transition from numbers to narrative. "Ms. Calloway, the files provided by Alexis Morgan contain extensive documentation of what appears to be systematic financial misconduct at Calloway Legal over the past 18 months. We've identified 3 distinct categories of concerning activity." He opened the first folder, turning it so I could see the highlighted figures. "First, there's evidence of client fund misappropriation. Retainer payments and settlement monies were temporarily diverted to accounts not properly designated as client trust accounts, then returned, usually, before clients would notice discrepancies." Float fraud," I murmured, recognizing the classic pattern where someone temporarily misuses funds, intending to replace them before the rightful owner becomes aware. "Precisely," James nodded. "Second, we found evidence of duplicate billing. Clients charged multiple times for the same services, with the additional payments directed to separate accounts rather than the firm's primary operating account." He opened a second folder containing spreadsheets with highlighted entries. The most concerning pattern involves these transactions beginning approximately 7 months ago. Substantial amounts were transferred from various firm accounts to a holding company called NC Ventures. Nathan's initials, I noted. Yes. NC Ventures was established last May as a Wyoming LLC with minimal disclosure requirements. From there, funds were moved through several additional entities before ultimately landing in an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The magnitude of what James was describing began to register fully. This wasn't merely financial mismanagement or ethical corner-cutting. This was deliberate, sophisticated fraud, potentially involving millions of dollars. How much? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. James exchanged a glance with Patricia before answering. Based on these records, approximately $7 million has moved through this structure over the past 7 months. The most recent transfer, $450,000, occurred 3 days before Thanksgiving. 3 days before Nathan announced our divorce at the dinner table. The timing couldn't be coincidental. There's more, Patricia said, opening another folder. The forensic team found documentation of a business loan Nathan secured 14 months ago using your home as collateral. The loan was for $1. $2 million from Atlantic Regional Bank, ostensibly for office expansion and technology upgrades at Callaway Legal. She slid a document across the table, a loan agreement bearing what appeared to be my signature on the spousal consent line. I never signed this, I said immediately, studying the signature. It's similar to mine, but the pressure points and letter formation are off. This is a forgery. We suspected as much, Patricia nodded, particularly given what we now know about the actual ownership of your home. Nathan couldn't legitimately use the property as collateral since it belongs to the Elizabeth Bennet Trust, not either of you individually or jointly. The implications crystallized with disturbing clarity. So Nathan forged my signature on loan documents for a property he didn't actually own, secured funds based on fraudulent collateral, then potentially diverted those funds offshore through a series of shell companies. That's our current assessment, James confirmed, though we'll need more comprehensive investigation to establish the complete financial trail. Where does Rebecca fit into this? I asked, remembering Alexis's suggestion that Nathan's young paralegal was more accomplice than mere romantic interest. Patricia turned her laptop toward me, displaying a corporate registration document. Rebecca Davis is listed as a managing member of Horizon Capital LLC, one of the entities in the transfer chain between NC Ventures and the Cayman accounts. Her involvement appears substantive rather than incidental. The pieces aligned with disturbing precision. Nathan's hasty exit from our marriage, the public announcement that ensured clean break rather than gradual separation, the rush to establish new living arrangements with Rebecca, all now appeared as components of a calculated strategy rather than impulsive personal choices. What happens now? I asked, legal training helping me focus on next steps rather than the emotional impact of these revelations. Patricia leaned forward, her expression grave but determined. We have several immediate considerations. First, protecting you from potential liability or financial exposure resulting from Nathan's actions. Second, determining our legal obligations regarding reporting potential crimes while balancing strategic advantage in divorce proceedings. Third, securing any assets that might be vulnerable to further manipulation or concealment. Can we prove the signature forgery? I asked, focusing on the most immediately actionable issue. Yes, James replied confidently. Forensic handwriting analysis can establish with high probability that you didn't sign those documents. Additionally, we can demonstrate that you couldn't have knowingly consented to using the house as collateral since it wasn't yours or Nathan's to leverage, a fact Nathan presumably didn't know, but that invalidates the loan, regardless of signature. Authenticity. Patricia nodded in agreement. We're preparing filings to immediately inform Atlantic Regional Bank about the fraudulent nature of the collateral. This serves dual purposes, protecting you from any liability associated with loan default and potentially triggering the bank's own fraud investigation into Nathan's activities. What about the divorce proceedings? I asked. How does this impact our approach? Significantly, Patricia said, her expression shifting toward the strategic consideration I had come to value in her counsel. Nathan clearly anticipated standard divorce negotiations where marital assets would be divided equitably, likely with him retaining control of his law practice while you kept the house. He didn't know the house was already exclusively yours, and he certainly didn't expect us to uncover his financial improprieties before negotiations began. She closed the folders, organizing them with methodical precision that suggested sorting. Her thoughts simultaneously. We now have substantial leverage. Nathan isn't just facing divorce. He's potentially facing criminal charges, disbarment, and financial ruin if his activities become known to authorities, clients, and the Bar Association. You're suggesting we use this information as negotiating leverage? I clarified, uncomfortable with the potential ethical implications. I'm suggesting, Patricia corrected carefully, that we approach negotiations with full awareness of Nathan's vulnerabilities and likely priorities. His primary concern now won't be maximizing his share of marital assets, but minimizing exposure to criminal and professional consequences. She held up a hand to forestall my next question. This doesn't mean concealing criminal activity or participating in any improper agreements. It means understanding that Nathan will likely accept less favorable divorce terms in exchange for a controlled, discreet resolution that doesn't immediately trigger external investigations. The strategic picture became clearer. So rather than contentious litigation over marital assets, we anticipate he'll seek rapid settlement once he realizes we know about his financial activities. Exactly, Patricia confirmed, which gives us significant advantage in structuring settlement terms favorable to you and the children. James gathered his materials, indicating the financial portion of our discussion was concluding. I'll continue analyzing these records to establish the complete picture of fund movements and potential liability exposure. We should have comprehensive assessment by week's end. After he departed, Patricia shifted our conversation to immediate practical steps. We need to move quickly, she advised. Nathan has already been attempting to accelerate divorce negotiations, likely hoping to finalize arrangements before his financial activities came to light. When he receives notification about our challenge to the fraudulent loan collateral, he'll realize at least some aspects of his misconduct have been discovered. What do you recommend? I asked, professional trust in her guidance overriding the emotional turbulence these revelations had created. First, we file for exclusive possession of the marital residence, which we now know is actually your separate property. This establishes clear boundaries about living arrangements during proceedings. She made a note on her legal pad. Second, we petition for temporary support orders that secure adequate financial resources for you and the children during the pendency of the divorce. Third, we request comprehensive asset freezing to prevent further dissipation or concealment of marital property. And if Nathan challenges these measures? Patricia's smile held professional confidence rather than personal satisfaction. Then, we begin introducing evidence of financial impropriety into the court record, gradually escalating from vague references to specific documentation, depending on his level of resistance. She leaned forward slightly. But he won't challenge them, Olivia. Once Nathan understands we have evidence of potentially criminal financial misconduct, his priority will shift from fighting over assets to damage control. He'll seek settlement, as quickly and quietly as possible. I processed this assessment, recognizing its strategic logic while still grappling with the magnitude of Nathan's deception. Beyond the personal betrayal of infidelity was a more profound breach of trust. The revelation that the man I had built a life with for 18 years had engaged in activities that could result in criminal prosecution, professional destruction, and lasting damage to our children's financial security and family reputation. What about the children? I asked, pivoting to my most essential concern. How do we protect them from the fallout if Nathan's activities become public? Patricia's expression softened slightly, professional strategy yielding momentarily to human compassion. That's perhaps the most compelling reason for pursuing settlement rather than contentious litigation. A negotiated resolution with appropriate confidentiality provisions offers the best chance of minimizing public exposure that could impact Megan and Jason. She made another note. We should also consider establishing trusts for each child using portions of your inheritance, structures that would secure their educational funding and provide future financial foundation regardless of what happens. With Nathan's legal and professional situation, this suggestion aligned perfectly with my priorities. Whatever anger or sense of betrayal I felt toward Nathan, protecting our children from the consequences of his actions remained paramount. I'd like to move forward with that immediately, I decided, regardless of how the divorce proceedings unfold. Patricia nodded approvingly. I'll connect you with our Trust and Estates division. They can work in parallel with our divorce team to establish appropriate structures. As our meeting concluded, Patricia walked me to her office door, pausing before opening it. Olivia, I've handled hundreds of divorces involving financial complexity and misconduct. What distinguishes your situation isn't just the evidence we've uncovered or the legal advantage it provides, but your ability to maintain focus on substantive priorities rather than punitive impulses. Her observation caught me by surprise. Meaning? Meaning that despite Nathan's extraordinary betrayal, both personal and financial, you've consistently centered your decisions around protecting your children and securing future stability rather than seeking retribution. That clarity will serve you well in the challenging months ahead. As I drove to the courthouse for my 11 o'clock hearing, Patricia's words echoed alongside the morning's revelations. The extent of Nathan's deception far exceeded what I had imagined, extending beyond romantic infidelity to potentially criminal financial misconduct that threatened not just our marriage, but the professional reputation and legal standing he had spent decades building. Yet, amid the shock and warranted anger, I found myself focused less on Nathan's punishment than on creating protection and stability for myself and our children. This orientation wasn't martyrdom or denial of legitimate grievances, but pragmatic, recognition of what ultimately mattered most, building secure foundation for the future, rather than remaining entangled in the wreckage of the past. By the time I reached the courthouse parking garage, I had mentally compartmentalized the morning's discoveries sufficiently to focus on my immediate professional responsibilities. The discipline that had served me throughout my legal career, the ability to set aside personal concerns to address clients' needs with complete attention, now helped me navigate what might otherwise have been overwhelming circumstances. 3 hours later, having successfully argued for summary judgment in my client's favor, I emerged from the courthouse to find 3 missed calls and a text message from Nathan. Need to meet immediately. Critical situation with the house loan. Call me ASAP. Atlantic Regional Bank had clearly wasted no time in contacting him after receiving notification about the fraudulent collateral. His panic was evident even in the brief text message, the composed, controlling persona giving way to urgent demand. Rather than returning his call, I texted Patricia. Nathan reaching out about critical situation with house loan. How should I proceed? Her response came within minutes. Refer him to me directly. All communication about financial matters should go through counsel given developing circumstances. I texted Nathan accordingly. Please have your attorney contact Patricia Winters regarding any financial matters. His reply was immediate and uncharacteristically emotional. This isn't about divorce. The bank is claiming fraudulent collateral. We need to address this together before it escalates. The "we" was particularly telling. Nathan attempting to re-establish partnership in the face of potential legal jeopardy, seeking my assistance with consequences he had created through deception. For 18 years, this approach had effectively secured my cooperation and support, my practical nature responding to crisis with solutions rather than recrimination. I composed my response with careful precision. Nathan, given the complexities involved, all communication about financial and legal matters should occur through our respective attorneys. Patricia Winters is available to connect with your counsel immediately. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared as he typed and deleted multiple responses. Finally, you don't understand the seriousness of this situation. My entire practice could be at risk. The appeal to professional concern might once have moved me to set aside personal boundaries in service to crisis management. Now, with fuller understanding of how Nathan had compromised not just our marriage, but potentially my own professional standing through forged signatures and fraudulent representations, I maintained the boundary with reinforced clarity. I understand. Completely. That's why proper legal channels are essential. Please have your attorney contact Patricia without delay. By late afternoon, Patricia confirmed that Nathan's attorney, not his usual corporate counsel, but a specialist in white-collar defense, had reached out requesting urgent discussion of financial matters relevant to both dissolution proceedings and collateral regulatory concerns. As anticipated, Patricia noted with professional satisfaction, he's seeking comprehensive settlement rather than compartmentalized handling of separate issues. We're scheduling a preliminary discussion for tomorrow morning. That evening, I sat in the library of my home, the certainty of that ownership now serving as literal and figurative foundation amid surrounding uncertainty. The house was quiet, Jason having texted that he was studying at a friend's house. The solitude offered welcome space to process the day's revelations and consider their implications for the future taking shape before me. My phone chimed with a text from Megan. Finals almost done. Can I come home this weekend instead of waiting until official break starts? Need family time. The request reflected her emotional resilience, moving from initial shock and anger toward active engagement with our new reality. I replied immediately, absolutely. Text me your train details and I'll meet you at the station. As I set my phone down, the doorbell rang. An unexpected interruption at nearly 8 o'clock. Through the beveled glass panels, I recognized Caroline's silhouette and opened the door to find my sister bearing a bottle of wine and unmistakable determination. Emergency sister intervention, she announced, stepping inside without waiting for invitation. Mom told me about Thanksgiving, but I've been in Seattle for that conference and couldn't get back until now. You should have called me immediately. I've been managing, I replied, following her to the kitchen where she located wine glasses with familiar ease. Of course you have, Caroline agreed, uncorking the wine with practiced efficiency. You always manage. That doesn't mean you should face this alone. As she poured generous glasses of Cabernet, I found myself unexpectedly moved by her straightforward support. Caroline and I had always been close despite different temperaments and life choices. Where I had pursued structured profession and traditional family life, she had built successful career as marketing executive while remaining unmarried and childless by choice. Nathan left for his 20-something paralegal, Caroline summarized, handing me a glass. Announced it at Thanksgiving dinner with maximum dramatic effect. Classic midlife crisis playbook, down to the younger model and public declaration designed to preempt reconciliation. I took a sip of wine, considering how much of the evolving situation to share. Caroline deserved honesty, but the potential criminal implications of Nathan's financial activities required discretion. There's more to it than romantic impulse, I acknowledged carefully. Financial and professional complications have emerged that suggest his timing and approach were calculated rather than merely impulsive. Caroline's eyebrows rose. Financial complications? Nathan always projected such careful management of his practice. Appearances can be misleading, I replied, the understatement almost making me smile despite the circumstances. The divorce proceedings are revealing discrepancies that will likely impact settlement negotiations significantly. Understanding dawned in my sister's expression. He's been hiding assets? Or is it worse? Gambling. Investments gone bad. I can't discuss specifics, I said, attorney's caution tempering sisterly confidence. But the situation is more complex than standard divorce proceedings. Patricia Winters is handling the legal aspects with her typical thoroughness. Caroline whistled softly. Patricia Winters? The attorney who handled the Westfield divorce last year? Nathan's in trouble if you've retained her. The Westfield case had made regional headlines. High-profile divorce involving substantial assets and allegations of financial misconduct that had ultimately resulted in criminal charges against the husband, in addition to highly favorable settlement for the wife. Let's just say I'm ensuring appropriate representation given the circumstances, I acknowledged, neither confirming nor denying the parallels. Caroline studied me over the rim of her wine glass. You're handling this with remarkable composure. 18 years of marriage ends in public humiliation, and you're discussing appropriate legal representation like it's a minor contract dispute. Her observation mirrored Patricia's earlier comment about my focus on substantive priorities rather than punitive impulses. Was my response unusual? Was I suppressing legitimate anger or emotional trauma beneath professional management? I'm processing, I said, repeating what I had told Nathan 2 days earlier. The practical matters require immediate attention. The emotional landscape will unfold in its own time. Caroline's expression softened. You've always approached challenges that way, addressing tangible problems while creating space for feelings to emerge at their own pace. It's effective, but don't mistake management for resolution. The hurt will surface eventually. I know, I acknowledged, recognizing the wisdom in her caution. But right now, clarity serves me better than righteous anger or public breakdown. The children need stability. The legal proceedings require strategic thinking. Emotional indulgence would compromise both. Emotional acknowledgement isn't indulgence, Caroline corrected gently. It's necessary integration of experience. Just promise me you won't package this away so neatly that you never actually process what Nathan has done. To you, to your family, to the life you built together. Her concern touched deeper truth than I had allowed myself to recognize. My professional capacity for compartmentalization, the ability to separate emotional response from practical action, had served me well throughout my career and now during this personal crisis. But Caroline was right that management wasn't the same as resolution. At some point, I would need to fully feel the betrayal and loss beneath the strategic responses and practical arrangements. I promise, I said finally. But first, I need to secure the foundations, financial stability, legal protections, emotional support for the children. Then I can address my own healing process. Caroline nodded, accepting this sequencing as reasonable while clearly intending to hold me accountable to the eventual emotional work. Fair enough. Now tell me about the house situation. Mom mentioned something about grandmother Elizabeth. Making arrangements years ago? For the next hour, I shared the remarkable story of Elizabeth's foresight in establishing the trust that had secured our home and provided unexpected financial foundation amid Nathan's departure. Caroline listened with increasing appreciation for our grandmother's strategic thinking and concern for my long-term security. She saw what you couldn't, Caroline observed. The imbalance in contribution and commitment that characterized your marriage from the beginning. Perhaps, I acknowledged, still reconciling my memory of our marriage with the reality others had apparently observed more clearly. Or she simply believed women should control their own foundations regardless of relationship circumstances. Both can be true, Caroline pointed out. Elizabeth recognized your specific situation while applying her general philosophy about women's financial independence. The question is what you'll do with this foundation now that you understand its true nature and extent. Her question echoed my own emerging considerations about future direction, how Elizabeth's bequest might enable not just security amid divorce, but potential transformation in work, lifestyle, and purpose moving forward. I'm meeting with the executive team of her property management company after the new year, I shared, considering more direct involvement in the business rather than passive oversight. It might offer different professional challenges while providing more flexibility as the children transition toward independence. Caroline's expression registered genuine surprise. You'd consider leaving the firm after making senior partner and establishing your reputation? Not immediately, I clarified, but perhaps gradually transitioning toward different professional focus. The divorce proceedings and immediate aftermath require stability, but afterward, I paused, articulating emerging possibilities still taking shape in my mind. Afterward, I have options I hadn't recognized before. Options, Caroline repeated thoughtfully. That's what Elizabeth wanted for you. Not just financial security, but genuine choice about how to shape your life going forward. As Caroline departed later that evening, her parting words carried both support and gentle challenge. Remember that foundations aren't just what we stand on, Liv. They're what we build upon. Elizabeth secured the ground beneath your feet. What you construct there is entirely your choice now. Alone again in the quiet house, I found myself drawn to the third-floor turret room that had been my personal retreat throughout the years of restoration and family life. From its windows, the neighborhood spread before me. Historic homes with lights glowing behind Victorian windows, lives unfolding within walls that had witnessed generations of human drama, loss, resilience, and renewal. Caroline was right that foundations served dual purpose, providing security while creating possibility. Elizabeth had ensured I wouldn't lose the ground beneath my feet when Nathan's departure threatened to destabilize the life I had carefully constructed. But the true gift of her foresight wasn't merely preservation of what existed, but liberation to imagine what might be created next. For 18 years, I had built my life around balancing marriage, motherhood, and career, making countless small compromises and adjustments to accommodate Nathan's needs and professional aspirations alongside my own. Now, facing future unconstrained by those considerations, I found myself contemplating possibilities previously unexamined. What would life look like shaped primarily by my own priorities and values rather than constant negotiation and accommodation? What professional directions might I explore if flexible schedule became higher priority than traditional advancement? How might I engage with Elizabeth's business legacy in ways that honored her vision while expressing my own capabilities and interests? These questions didn't diminish the pain of betrayal or the challenges of navigating divorce amid revelations of Nathan's potential financial misconduct, but they offered meaningful counterbalance. The recognition that beyond the ending of one chapter lay the possibility of authoring another with greater authenticity and self-determination. As Patricia had observed, my focus remained fixed on constructive priorities rather than punitive reactions. Not because I lacked justifiable anger at Nathan's betrayal, but because forward momentum toward purposeful future served me better than entanglement in the wreckage he had created. Tomorrow would bring negotiation with Nathan's attorney, practical decisions about holiday arrangements, and continued management of both professional responsibilities and divorce proceedings. But beneath these immediate concerns, a deeper process had begun. The gradual recognition that foundations meant for security could equally support transformation, that endings contained beginnings, and that the strength I had always directed toward building shared life could now be channeled into creating one that more fully reflected my own vision and values. The morning dawned with the particular stillness that follows overnight snowfall, a pristine blanket of white transforming Philadelphia's historic streets. I stood at the turret window, watching the neighborhood come alive as early risers navigated freshly cleared sidewalks, and children tested the snow's potential for winter recreation before school. Today would bring the first formal confrontation between our respective legal teams. The meeting Patricia had arranged with Nathan's newly retained attorney, Michael Donovan, a specialist in white-collar defense whose involvement confirmed our suspicions about Nathan's primary concerns. My phone chimed with a text from Patricia. Donovan requested relocation of our meeting to his office. I declined. We maintain home field advantage at 10 a.m. as planned. Such tactical considerations had never been part of my personal life before, yet now they seemed necessary components of navigating this unexpected terrain. The professional strategies I had applied throughout my legal career, anticipating opposition moves, maintaining position strength, leveraging information advantages, had become relevant to my most intimate relationships. The doorbell rang. At precisely 9:45. Through the beveled glass, I recognized Patricia's distinctive silhouette, tall, impeccably postured, radiating composed authority even in silence. I opened the door to find her accompanied by James Powell, her forensic financial specialist, both immaculately dressed despite the snow. "Good morning," Patricia greeted me, stepping inside with practiced efficiency. "I hope you don't mind that." I brought James. Given the financial complexity we're addressing, having him present will signal our level of preparation and technical expertise. Of course, I agreed, leading them to the library where I had arranged a small conference setting. The antique mahogany table cleared of its usual books and family photographs, notepads and water carafes positioned with professional care. "Beautiful. Room?" James commented, glancing appreciatively at the restored fireplace and original built-in bookshelves. "Victorian craftsmanship is remarkable when properly preserved." "Thank you," I replied, the simple acknowledgement carrying unexpected, emotional weight. This space represented hundreds of hours of careful restoration, weekends spent stripping decades of paint from intricate woodwork, evenings researching period-appropriate materials, careful selection of craftspeople who respected the home's historical integrity. Work that Nathan had frequently dismissed as unnecessary perfectionism, but that had transformed the awkwardly divided space into the heart of our home. Patricia arranged her materials with methodical precision. "Nathan and Donovan will arrive at 10. Before they do, let's review our strategic approach." She outlined the framework she had developed, beginning with establishment of basic facts regarding property ownership and separate assets, before introducing evidence of financial irregularities with escalating specificity depending on Nathan's position and response. "Our objective isn't punitive," she reminded me, echoing my own priorities. "We're seeking expedited, comprehensive settlement that secures your interests and the children's future, while providing clean break from Nathan's mounting legal and professional complications." "And if he resists?" I asked, mentally preparing for potential confrontation. "Then we proceed with graduated disclosure of the evidence we've compiled," Patricia explained, "beginning with the fraudulent loan collateral documentation and proceeding toward the more serious offshore transfers, only if necessary to overcome resistance." James nodded in agreement. Most individuals in Nathan's position prioritize damage control over asset maximization once they understand the scope of potential exposure. Financial self-preservation typically outweighs property division considerations. At precisely 10 cows, the doorbell rang again. I moved to answer it, preparing to face Nathan for the first time since learning the true extent of his deception. The calm I had maintained throughout the preceding days wavered momentarily as I reached for the doorknob. Nathan stood on the porch, snow dusting the shoulders of his cashmere overcoat, accompanied by a silver-haired man I presumed was Michael Donovan. The contrast between Nathan's obvious tension, jaw tight, posture rigid, and his companion's practiced composure spoke volumes about their respective positions. "Olivia." Nathan nodded stiffly, attempting neutral professionalism despite the circumstances. "This is Michael Donovan, my attorney." "Please come in," I replied, matching his tone while avoiding direct engagement. Patricia and James are waiting. In the library. As I led them through the entry hall toward the library, I noticed Nathan's gaze sweeping across the familiar surroundings. The home he had believed was partly his, the space he had expected to claim significant equity from. During divorce proceedings, his expression shifted subtly as he registered the personal touches that had always been primarily mine. The family photographs I had arranged, the artwork I had selected, the antiques I had carefully restored. In the library, introductions proceeded with formal politeness masking underlying tension. Michael Donovan projected the particular blend of authority and approachability characteristic of highly successful attorneys: expensive suit worn with comfortable confidence, firm handshake accompanied by direct eye contact, voice modulated to convey both strength and reasonableness. "Thank you for arranging this preliminary discussion," he began, once everyone was seated. "I believe direct communication between counsel can facilitate more efficient resolution of what appears to be a complex situation." Patricia matched his professional tone precisely. "Indeed, clarity regarding fundamental facts provides essential foundation for productive negotiation." She opened her portfolio, extracting the property deed showing the Elizabeth Bennet Trust as sole owner of our home. "Let's begin with establishing basic parameters regarding assets. As you can see, the primary residence is held in trust with Ms. Bennet as sole trustee and beneficiary. This arrangement was established 15 years ago by Elizabeth Bennet, predating current circumstances by considerable margin." Donovan accepted the document, reviewing it with practiced neutrality before passing it to Nathan, whose expression tightened further as he confirmed what he already knew from our earlier conversation. "Additionally," Patricia continued, "Ms. Bennet has inherited substantial separate assets from Elizabeth Bennet's estate, including commercial properties, investment accounts, and business interests. Comprehensive documentation has been provided in the disclosure packet." She placed another folder on the table. The detailed inventory of Elizabeth's bequest that legally established these assets as separate property rather than marital assets subject to division. Donovan reviewed these materials with appropriate professional attention, while Nathan's gaze remained fixed on the property deed, his fingers tensing slightly against the paper. "These arrangements appear properly documented," Donovan acknowledged. "However, there remains question of mortgage payments made from joint funds over 15 years. My client has contributed substantially to what he reasonably believed was marital property." Patricia nodded, anticipating this argument. "We've prepared full accounting of those payments. As documented, the mortgage was satisfied 5 years ago. Subsequent payments were directed to an investment account that now holds approximately $320,000. Ms. Bennet acknowledges these as joint contributions and is prepared to address equitable distribution of these specific funds." The strategic concession was carefully calibrated, acknowledging legitimate claim to funds actually contributed, while maintaining clear separation of the substantially more valuable property and inheritance assets. "Now," Patricia continued, shifting toward the more sensitive issues, "there are additional financial matters requiring attention before we can progress toward comprehensive settlement." She nodded to James, who opened his own portfolio and extracted the fraudulent loan, documents bearing my forged signature. 14 months ago," James began, his tone reflecting professional observation rather than accusation. "Atlantic Regional Bank provided $2 million business loan to Callaway Legal, securing this loan with collateral that appears to be Ms. Bennet's residence. The spousal consent form bears signature purporting to be Ms. Bennet's, though forensic analysis indicates otherwise." He placed the documents before Donovan, who reviewed them with heightened attention, expression revealing nothing while Nathan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Moreover," James continued, "the collateral representation was fundamentally flawed regardless of signature authenticity, as neither Mr. Callaway nor Ms. Bennet owned the property in question. It belonged then, as now, to the Elizabeth Bennet, trust. Donovan glanced at Nathan, a subtle communication passing between them before he responded. My client was unaware of the trust arrangement at the time of loan application. He believed in good faith that the property was jointly held, marital asset. Perhaps, Patricia acknowledged without conceding the point. However, the signature issue remains problematic independent of property ownership. Ms. Bennett never signed these documents, raising serious questions about document authenticity and representation to lending institutions. The strategic escalation had begun, moving from establishing separate property to introducing evidence of potential fraud, while maintaining focus on specific documentation rather than broader pattern of financial misconduct. Nathan leaned toward Donovan, whispering something I couldn't hear. Donovan nodded slightly before addressing Patricia directly. These are concerning allegations that warrant further investigation, he acknowledged. However, potential discrepancies in loan documentation represent separate issue from divorce proceedings. I suggest we focus today's discussion on marital asset division and support arrangements. Patricia smiled with professional composure that conveyed both courtesy and immovable position. I'm afraid these matters are inextricably connected. Mr. Donovan, financial conduct during marriage directly impacts equitable distribution determinations, particularly when improper dissipation of assets may have occurred. She extracted another folder, this one containing evidence of fund transfers from Callaway Legal to the Wyoming LLC and subsequent entities. Our forensic team has identified concerning patterns of asset movement that require clarification before meaningful settlement discussions can proceed. As Donovan reviewed these materials, Nathan's composure finally fractured. "This is outrageous," he interjected, color rising in his face. "You're invading private business matters completely unrelated to our divorce. Olivia has no legitimate interest in internal operations of my practice." Patricia remained unfazed by his outburst. "On the contrary, Mr. Callaway. When marital funds potentially subsidize business operations subsequently used to divert substantial assets offshore immediately preceding divorce filing, those transactions become entirely relevant to proceedings." The precision of her statement, referencing offshore transfers and timing relative to divorce, clearly caught Nathan off guard. His eyes widened slightly as he realized the extent of our knowledge about his financial maneuvers. Donovan placed a restraining hand on Nathan's arm, professional warning to maintain composure. "Perhaps we should take brief recess to review these materials more thoroughly before continuing discussions." "Of course," Patricia agreed smoothly. "We understand the need for proper consultation. However, I should mention that Atlantic Regional Bank has already been notified about the collateral misrepresentation. Their fraud division will likely initiate formal investigation within days, if not already underway." The implicit timeline created necessary pressure, establishing that delays in negotiation wouldn't prevent external consequences from Nathan's actions. His financial misconduct had created momentum beyond our divorce proceedings, mechanisms, already in motion that separate negotiations couldn't entirely halt. 10 minutes, Donovan requested, standing to indicate need for private consultation with his client. As they left the library for the privacy of the adjacent sitting room, Patricia turned to me with quiet confidence. "He understands the position? Now. The question is whether Nathan will accept reality or attempt further resistance." "Which do you expect?" I asked, watching Donovan's controlled guidance of Nathan toward private consultation. "Acceptance," Patricia predicted. Donovan is experienced enough to recognize when negotiation serves his client better than confrontation. The evidence is substantial, the external investigations already initiated, and the potential consequences severe. Their best strategy now is controlled resolution that minimizes public exposure and professional damage. Her assessment proved accurate. When Nathan and Donovan returned 11 minutes later, the shift in approach was immediately evident. Nathan remained silent, jaw tight, but expression resigned, while Donovan adopted the particular tone of an attorney transitioning from adversarial positioning to damage control negotiation. In light of these complex circumstances, he began, carefully, my client recognizes the value of expedited comprehensive resolution. We're prepared to discuss settlement framework addressing all outstanding matters between the parties. Patricia nodded, acknowledging this shift without comment on its motivation. Excellent. I suggest we outline basic parameters today, with formal drafting to follow once principles are established. What followed was remarkably efficient negotiation of divorce terms structured to protect my interests and the children's future, while providing Nathan face-saving exit from marriage that minimized public exposure of his financial activities. The framework included full acknowledgement of my separate property rights to the house and inherited assets, equitable division of the $320,000 accumulated from post-mortgage payments, and generous support provisions for the children, including college expenses and future security. In exchange, our side agreed to confidentiality provisions regarding financial evidence uncovered during proceedings and coordination with banking authorities to address loan improprieties through settlement, rather than criminal prosecution when possible. These terms are contingent upon full financial disclosure and cooperation, Patricia emphasized as the outline took shape. Any subsequent discovery of undisclosed assets or ongoing improper financial activity would invalidate settlement provisions and necessitate renewed proceedings under significantly less favorable circumstances. Donovan nodded, understanding of both the explicit terms and implicit warning. My client is committed to complete transparency moving forward. Nathan remained largely silent throughout this process, offering necessary acknowledgments when directly addressed but otherwise maintaining rigid composure that barely contained evident tension. His occasional glances around the library, at the space where our family had gathered for 18 years of birthdays, holidays, and ordinary evenings, carried complex emotion I chose not to interpret or address in this forum. As the meeting concluded 2 hours later, preliminary agreement established and next steps clearly defined, Patricia and James gathered their materials with efficient professionalism. We'll have formal documents prepared within 3 days, Patricia informed Donovan. Assuming no substantive objections, we could proceed to execution by week's end. The accelerated timeline represented significant departure from typical divorce proceedings, months of negotiation compressed into days through combination of compelling evidence and mutual interest in rapid resolution. As our respective attorneys completed their final arrangements, Nathan approached me directly for the first time since the meeting began. "Could we speak privately?" he asked, voice carefully controlled but underlying strain evident in tightened jaw and tension around his eyes. I hesitated, weighing potential value against probable discomfort of direct engagement. Patricia caught my questioning glance and nodded slightly, professional acknowledgement that brief conversation posed no strategic risk given the framework already established. Briefly, I agreed, leading Nathan to the front porch where freshly fallen snow created insulating stillness around the house. In the clear winter light, I noticed details I had overlooked during our previous encounters. New lines around his eyes, slight disarray in the hair he typically maintained with meticulous care, the absent shine of the expensive watch he had worn consistently for years. Small indicators of disruption in the carefully constructed image he had maintained throughout our marriage and professional life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.